It was an unusually quiet morning when I found myself parked by Waverly Creek Bridge, waiting for Randy to finish with his morning coffee. The fog was still thick, like a heavy blanket, draping over the streets, casting a sense of eerie stillness over the area. The only sound was the faint rustling of leaves in the trees and the distant murmur of the creek running beneath the bridge. I had always found this place peaceful, an unnoticed corner of the town that most people passed by without a second thought. But today, something was different. Something was waiting for me under that bridge. The cry was faint at first, barely audible. It cut through the silence like a knife, rising from deep beneath the bridge. It was not the sound of a bird, nor was it the cry of a raccoon, as Randy might suggest. It was a soft, desperate sound, a cry for help. I felt a chill run down my spine as I strained to hear it again. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice low, almost afraid to speak louder in case I was mistaken. Randy looked up from his coffee, his eyebrows furrowed, clearly confused. "What, you mean the wind?" he asked, not giving much thought to it. But I could tell from the look on his face that he was already considering the possibility of something more. "No," I said firmly. "Listen closely. It's coming from under the bridge." Randy set his cup down and stood up slowly, squinting through the thick fog. "Could be a stray cat," he suggested half-heartedly, "or maybe a coyote. But something." In the sound, something in the tone felt different. It wasn't the usual cry of an animal. It was more haunting, almost human in its desperation. I grabbed the flashlight from the truck and climbed out, moving toward the bridge. Randy followed me, though I could see the hesitation in his steps. The closer I got to the edge, the clearer the sound became. A kitten, maybe? A cry filled with fear and loneliness. A sound I couldn't ignore. When I reached the embankment beneath the bridge, I scanned the dark, damp space with the beam of the flashlight. It wasn't easy to navigate. The ground was slippery with mud, and large pieces of debris littered the area. But the sound continued, faint but unmistakable, echoing in the silence. My heart pounded as I stepped forward, my eyes scanning the shadows. Then I saw it, something small, barely visible in the corner of the beam of light. There, curled up in a tight ball, was a tiny kitten. Its fur was matted, soaked from the rain, and it was shivering uncontrollably. Its eyes were wide and filled with fear as it looked up at me, but it didn't run. It just stayed there, frozen, its tiny body trembling. I knelt down slowly, careful not to scare it. "Hey there," I called softly, my voice gentle, coaxing. "It's okay, you're safe now." The kitten didn't respond right away. Its body was shaking too much, and it remained in place, eyes fixed on me with uncertainty. I reached out slowly, trying to show it that I meant no harm. My heart ached as I saw how fragile it was, so small and vulnerable in the middle of all this mess. "Come here, little one," I whispered, reaching a little farther. The kitten hesitated for a moment, then almost cautiously it took a few shaky steps toward me. I could feel my chest tighten as it inched closer. There was something about this kitten's quiet vulnerability that struck me hard. It felt like it was waiting for someone to care, someone to save it. I scooped the kitten into my arms, cradling it gently against my chest. Its tiny body was stiff from cold and fear, but as I held it, the trembling slowly began to subside. The kitten let out a soft mew, as if to thank me, or perhaps to reassure itself that it was finally safe. "Randy," I called over my shoulder, my voice shaking just a little. "Get down here. We need to get this little one to safety." Randy climbed down quickly, his expression changing from one of confusion to concern when he saw the kitten in my arms. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and helped me carefully make my way back up the embankment. We took the kitten back to the truck, and I wrapped it in an old blanket I found in the back seat. It was still cold, but it seemed to settle as I kept it close, trying to warm it up. I could tell this wasn't just any ordinary kitten. There was something about its quiet desperation, the way it had clung to me as if it knew I would protect it. It had found me for a reason. As we drove back, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something deeper than the kitten's distress. The pieces weren't adding up. There was more to this kitten than just a random stray in need of help. Why had it been under the bridge alone? What was it running from? The answers weren't clear yet, but I knew one thing for sure. The discovery of this little kitten was just the beginning of something much bigger, and I was about to find out just how deep the mystery went. The drive home from the bridge was quieter than I had expected. River, the kitten, was curled up on the blanket I had laid out for him in the passenger seat. He hadn't made a sound since we left the creekside, and for a moment, I wondered if he'd fallen asleep. But as I glanced over at him, I noticed he was awake, his wide eyes staring at me with a mixture of uncertainty and curiosity. There was a sadness in those eyes, an unspoken story that I couldn't quite grasp yet. I could feel a pull to protect him, even though I knew so little about his past. Once we arrived home, I carried him inside, careful not to jostle him too much. As I laid him on a soft towel in the laundry room, I watched him for a moment, his tiny form shivering from the cold. His fur was still damp, his little body stiff from whatever ordeal he had gone through before I found him. But what struck me, more than his physical condition, was the way he seemed to shrink into himself, as if he was afraid to trust anyone. I couldn't imagine what kind of life he had led, what had brought him here to this moment. I took a deep breath and began to move with a sense of purpose. I had to take care of him. It wasn't just the responsibility of finding him that called me to action, it was the instinct that tugged at my heart. This kitten, this small, fragile creature, had been through something, and he needed more than just a warm home. He needed care, attention, and most importantly, someone who wouldn't give up on him. The first thing I did was set up a makeshift bed for him with the towels I had. As I went about gathering supplies, warm water, soap, and a soft brush, I could feel him watching me, his eyes fixed on my every movement. He was still hesitant, unsure if I was truly safe. I understood. I didn't know where he had come from, or what kind of life he had known before, but whatever it was, it had left its mark on him. He was guarded, cautious, and it made my heart ache. I filled a basin with warm water and gently placed him in it. At first he flinched, but when the warmth of the water touched his body, he settled slightly. The water was soothing, and I could see the tension in his little body start to ease. He was so small, and yet his fur was so thick and matted that I could barely see his true coat beneath the dirt. I worked slowly, gently combing through the tangles and knots in his fur, trying not to hurt him. It wasn't just the bath that was important, it was the connection, the time we were spending together. That would help him heal. As I washed him, I spoke softly to him, my voice low and calming. "You're okay now, River. You're safe. You don't have to be afraid anymore." He didn't respond, but his body grew more relaxed as I continued. It was almost as if he was starting to believe the words, starting to believe that things could be different. When I was finished, I gently patted him dry with a towel, his fur softening as I carefully worked to remove the last of the knots. When I was done, I set him on a clean, dry towel, and he immediately curled into a small ball, shivering from the cold, but no longer from fear. I didn't want to rush him, so I allowed him time to rest, quietly watching him as he lay there. As he slept, I reflected on the events of the day. Finding him under the bridge had been no accident. There had been something almost predestined about it, like fate had led me to that exact spot at that exact moment. But the mystery remained. Why had River been there? Who had left him? What had he witnessed? I couldn't stop thinking about the lockbox, the documents, the letters, the missing persons case. All of it was connected somehow. And River, this tiny kitten, was a part of that mystery. I didn't know how yet, but I felt certain of it. The question was, where did we go from here? After a while, I went to the kitchen and set out a small plate of food for River, a mix of soft food and some fresh water. When I returned to the laundry room, I placed the food near him. At first, he didn't react, still deeply asleep. But after a moment, the sound of the food being placed down caught his attention. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked up at me, a soft mewl escaping from his throat. It was the first time I had heard him make a sound since we found him. It was a gentle, almost pleading noise, as though he was trying to communicate something, but didn't know how. I sat down next to him, slowly, trying not to startle him. He stared at the food for a long moment, then took a hesitant step forward. His tiny paws reached the plate, and he began to eat, his movements slow but sure. He was hungry, and I could see the relief in his eyes as he finally allowed himself to eat. He devoured the food with a quiet desperation, as though it had been a long time since he had eaten. I watched him as he ate, my thoughts racing. The kitten was healing? Yes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. There was something deeper at play here. Something more than just a kitten in need of a new home. As he finished eating, River crawled back into the blanket I had laid out for him. This time, he curled up closer to me, his body still stiff, but not as fearful as before. He trusted me, I realized. Not completely, but enough to feel safe in my presence. I stroked his fur gently, and for a brief moment, everything felt right. There was no more fear in his eyes, only the quiet, calming sound of his breathing as he drifted off to sleep again. I had no idea what awaited us, but I knew that I couldn't abandon him now. No matter where this path would lead us, River was mine to care for, and together we would uncover the truth about him, about the lockbox, and about everything else that had been hidden for so long. River had been sleeping for hours when I finally decided to check on him again. It was late afternoon, and the sun had started to dip behind the horizon, casting an orange glow through the window. The house was quiet, too quiet. I found myself sitting in the same spot, waiting for him to wake, wondering what had been going through his tiny head as he lay there so still. I hadn't moved much myself, still trying to process the strange discovery under the bridge earlier in the day. But as much as I wanted to focus on the mystery of the lockbox, River's presence in my life had become more pressing. I walked over to the laundry room where he had been resting. The towel I had set out for him now, a little mussed from his movements. The moment I opened the door, I saw him, his soft brown fur blending into the blanket, his body curled tightly in a ball. He looked smaller than before, almost fragile, but something about the way he lay there told me he was no longer entirely afraid. His eyes were closed, but his breathing was calm, steady, like he was beginning to accept that he wasn't in danger anymore. I stood there for a moment, watching him. He was no longer the trembling, scared kitten I had found under the bridge. He was starting to trust me, to let his guard down, and I couldn't help but feel a warmth in my chest as I watched him sleep so peacefully. I knew that I needed to give him time to adjust. but I also knew that I couldn't let him stay in the laundry room forever. He needed more than just shelter. He needed companionship, care, and a place where he could truly feel safe. I couldn't keep him hidden away in this room. So, with a soft sigh, I bent down and gently scooped him into my arms. Careful not to startle him, his eyes fluttered open when I lifted him, and for a moment, he just stared up at me, as if trying to figure out whether I was a friend or a threat. But I didn't move too quickly. I held him close to my chest, my heart beating in time with his. I felt the tremor of his tiny body as he tensed in my arms, but I could feel him relaxing slowly as I spoke to him in a soft voice. "It's okay, River. You're safe. You're home." He didn't mewl or squirm like I expected. Instead, he just looked up at me, his little body still and tentative, as if he had finally started to understand that he wasn't going to be abandoned again. I carried him to the living room and sat down on the couch, making sure he was nestled comfortably on my lap. It felt strange having him so close to me, but I knew it was the right thing to do. He had been through something unimaginable, something that had made him fear everything around him. But that fear was slowly beginning to fade, and for the first time since I found him, I felt like I could breathe easy too. I didn't rush. I allowed him time to settle. For a few moments, River just lay there, his head resting on my legs, eyes closed as if he were still trying to comprehend the change. I stroked his soft fur gently, running my fingers through the matted spots that hadn't completely come out in the bath. It was an easy rhythm, one that I hoped would comfort him. "Where did you come from, little one?" I whispered, more to myself than to him. "Why were you under that bridge?" River shifted slightly, nuzzling his head into my lap as if he could feel the tension in my voice. I took a deep breath and tried to push the thoughts of the lockbox from my mind. It wasn't the right time to investigate any further. It was the right time to give River the care he needed to heal, emotionally and physically. I grabbed the plate of food I had set aside earlier, gently setting it down in front of him. I watched as he raised his head at the scent of the food, his nose twitching slightly, his eyes widening in hunger. Without hesitation, he began to eat, though he did so slowly at first, as though unsure whether the food was real, whether it was safe. His cautious approach didn't surprise me. This little kitten had been through so much, and I wasn't sure if anyone had ever treated him kindly enough to allow him to trust food that easily. But as he took a few more bites, I could see his tension beginning to ease. His tail, which had been tucked tightly between his legs for so long, relaxed a little, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Maybe it was the promise of a full belly, maybe it was the relief of being safe, but whatever it made me feel like I was doing the right thing. After he finished eating, I took him to the window, where I sat on the floor with him on my lap, letting him look out at the world beyond. I knew he was still adjusting to everything, the new smells, the new sounds, the new people, but I couldn't help but think that he needed more than just food and shelter. He needed to know that he had a place in this world, a place where he wouldn't be abandoned or forgotten. I could see that the outside world was still a bit overwhelming for him. As he peered out the window, his ears flicked at every passing car, every distant noise. But I could see something else, curiosity, and a hint of confidence, as though he was starting to realize that the world didn't have to be so scary. He could find his place here, just like I was finding my place with him. The bond between us had already begun to form, albeit quietly, but the more I cared for River, the more I realized that it wasn't just about giving him food and shelter. It was about giving him the safety and love he had never known, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. The soft, warm purr that started to vibrate from his chest as I held him close told me that he was beginning to accept the change, beginning to trust again. I looked down at him and smiled softly, a sense of purpose filling me. I was determined to give him the care and attention he needed to heal. There was something about him, something in the way he clung to me, that made me believe we were meant to find each other. River was more than just a lost kitten. He was a piece of a puzzle that was still unfolding, and I was committed to uncovering the truth behind it. The evening wore on, and I spent the rest of the night with him, gently caring for him as he rested. As the hours passed, I watched him finally fall into a peaceful sleep. His small body lay sprawled out across the blanket, no longer stiff with fear, but loose and content. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was able to relax, knowing that I had done something right. But even as I watched him sleep, the nagging feeling in my chest didn't quite fade. I knew there was more to this story, more to River, than just the past few hours I'd spent caring for him. The connection to the lockbox, to the missing woman, to whatever he had been through before those questions still haunted me. But for tonight, I pushed them aside. River was safe, and that, for now, was enough. The days that followed were a blur of quiet routine. River had quickly adjusted to his new home. His once cautious steps had become more confident, and his trust in me seemed to grow with every passing hour. He no longer hesitated to come when I called, and his purrs had become a regular sound in the house, as comforting as the hum of a distant machine. But as much as I wanted to bask in the simple pleasure of caring for him, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that had settled. In the back of my mind, I had taken in a kitten that had clearly been through a lot, and I needed to understand why he was under that bridge. why he was tied to something larger than I could see. The mornings were the best part of the day for me and River. He would always greet the sunrise with a soft mew, stretching out on his blanket in the corner of the room, as if he was ready to begin another day of discovery. I had started waking up earlier, just to enjoy the moments when we were alone, before the rest of the world intruded. River would curl up beside me on the couch, his tiny body pressed against mine as we both watched the sunlight filter through the curtains, casting soft shadows across the room. The mornings were peaceful, but as soon as I moved toward the door, River was quick to follow. It was like he knew I had things to do, and he wanted to be part of it. He'd follow me around the house, his little tail flicking with excitement as he padded around behind me, always staying within a few inches of my feet. "Where do you think you're going, River?" I would laugh, more to myself than to him, as I watched him scurry behind me. His response was always the same curiosity and a quiet determination to stick with me. There was a bond forming between us, one that was growing stronger with every shared moment, every meal, every moment of peace we found together. But deep down, I knew I wasn't just taking care of a kitten. River had become a part of my life, in a way I didn't expect, and every time I looked at him, I felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. But that bond wasn't just one-sided. River had begun to open up in ways I hadn't expected. I could see it in the way he followed me, in the way he trusted me with even the smallest gestures. He had started sitting on the windowsill, staring out at the world beyond. It was as if he was watching, waiting for something, or perhaps he was searching for something familiar. I couldn't ignore the way his gaze would linger on the window for hours. His body tense, ears alert to every sound outside. He would sit there, unmoving, as if waiting for something to happen. Sometimes I would sit beside him, quietly watching the outside world with him, but every time I tried to coax him away, he refused. It was like he was connected to something outside, something that was beyond my understanding. That wasn't until a week later that the pattern became clear. We were out in the yard enjoying the early evening light, when River suddenly froze in. He was sitting on the grass, his tail still, his ears pricked up like he had heard something I couldn't. I watched him for a moment, waiting to see if he would move, but he didn't. He stayed there, his eyes locked on something in the distance. "River, what is it, buddy?" I called out softly, but he didn't respond. His gaze was fixed, unwavering. I stood up slowly, trying not to startle him. Following his gaze, I looked toward the edge of the property, where the old woods began. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but there was something about the way River was watching that made me pause. I hadn't seen him act like this before. The air felt heavy, charged with some unspoken tension. I crouched down next to him, reaching out to gently stroke his back. His muscles tensed under my fingers, and for the first time, I felt a deep, unsettling connection to whatever it was he was sensing. "River, what's out there?" I murmured, more to myself than to him. He didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel a shift in the air around us. It was as if the world had slowed, as if everything was waiting for something to happen. I followed his gaze again, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what he was sensing, but I felt it too, a quiet urgency, a pull to something just out of reach. After what felt like an eternity, River stood up, his body still tense. He slowly began to walk toward the woods, his steps deliberate, but there was no hesitation in him. It was as if he knew exactly where he was going. "River, wait," I called out, my voice rising in alarm, but he didn't stop. He kept moving, and without thinking, I followed him. My legs moved of their own accord, the strange pull in my chest growing stronger with every step. We reached the edge of the woods, and River stopped. He turned back to look at me, his eyes locking onto mine, as if to say, "This is it. This is where you need to go." For a moment, I stood there, frozen, but something inside me told me I couldn't ignore him. I had to follow him. I had to understand. "All right," I whispered, my voice soft but resolute. "Let's go." I stepped into the woods. The damp earth cooled beneath my feet, and followed River. As he led me deeper into the trees, the further we went, the more the air seemed to thicken, as though we were entering a place that had been forgotten by time. River moved with purpose, his body low to the ground, his tail flicking with excitement. We walked for what felt like miles, my legs aching from the uneven terrain, but River never faltered. He moved through the woods with confidence, as though he had been here before, as if he knew this path by heart. I couldn't help but wonder what had brought him here, why he had led me this far. Finally, we came to a clearing. The trees opened up to reveal an old, dilapidated shed, its wood rotting and weathered by time. It looked abandoned, unused for years. My heart raced as I looked at it, but River didn't hesitate. He moved toward it, his step steady and sure. I stood at the edge of the clearing, unsure of what to do, but River stopped in front of the shed, his body still, his gaze fixed on the door. It was as though he was waiting for me to make the next move. "River, what is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but the kitten didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the door again, his body tense with anticipation. And just like that, I understood. This was it. This was the moment he had been leading me toward. I took a deep breath and walked forward, the weight of the moment settling in. River was leading me to something important. I wasn't sure what I would find, but I knew I had to see it through. I reached for the door, my hand trembling slightly as I touched the rusted handle. With a push, the door creaked open, revealing the darkness inside. I could barely make out anything in the dim light, but River stepped in before me, his eyes adjusting to the dark. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old wood. But there was something else too, a faint, almost imperceptible noise, like something or someone had been here recently. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped inside, following River, who moved further into the shed, his eyes darting around the room. He paused in front of a wooden crate, its edges chipped and worn, and then he turned back to look at me. His gaze was steady, unwavering, as if to say, "This is it. This is what you've been waiting for." I approached the crate slowly, feeling the weight of River's stare as I bent down to open it. The moment I lifted the lid, I saw it a bundle of old, tattered papers, yellowed with age. My fingers trembled as I picked them up, but I didn't need to read them to understand. The connection between River, the lockbox, and whatever had happened to this town was becoming clearer. The mystery was unfolding, and River, the kitten I had found under the bridge, was the key. The night after our discovery at the old shed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The air in the house felt charged, thick with the unspoken mystery that River had unknowingly led me into. As I sat on the couch, flipping through the papers from the crate we found in the shed, I couldn't ignore the growing sense that we were getting closer to something, but closer to what? And was it something we were prepared for? River, as usual, lay beside me, his head resting on my lap as I scrolled through the papers. The documents were yellowed, brittle, and filled with names I didn't recognize. But there was one thing that kept appearing, references to a family legacy, and something called the pact. It sounded like an old town secret, a whispered promise, made long ago that no one had dared to break. What was this secret, and why did River seem to know more about it than I did? Just as I was starting to piece together a pattern from the cryptic notes, River suddenly stirred, his body tensed, his fur bristling as he sat up and fixed his eyes on the window. He hadn't reacted like this before. His ears flicked, and his tail flicked nervously. A low growl vibrated in his throat. "River," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. "What is it, buddy?" I stood up, following his gaze toward the window. The street outside was dark, lit only by the dim glow of the streetlights. I couldn't see anything unusual, but River wasn't one to get worked up over nothing. His instincts had been spotted so far. I moved toward the window, peering out into the night. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, but nothing stood out. I sighed, dismissing it as a figment of my imagination, but just as I turned to walk back, River growled again, louder this time, a deep, menacing sound that sent a chill down my spine. I froze. Suddenly, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The feeling of being watched, no, being hunted, washed over me. The weight of the situation shifted. I wasn't just dealing with an abandoned kitten anymore. I was being pulled into something far more dangerous. River darted toward the door, his movements quick and calculated. He pawed at the door handle, desperately trying to get outside. Without thinking, I grabbed the leash, clipped it to his collar, and opened the door. Outside, the air was colder than it had been all day, the wind biting at my skin. The faint sound of footsteps could be heard somewhere in the distance. I squinted into the darkness, trying to discern any movement, but the street was empty. Too empty. River tugged at his leash, trying to drag me toward the edge of the yard. His body was tense, his eyes scanning the trees beyond the fence. I looked down at him, confused but trusting his instincts. He was leading me somewhere, pulling me in a direction that I didn't quite understand yet, but I had learned by now not to question his movements. If River was this anxious, something was wrong. The sound of the footsteps grew louder. Someone, or something, was out there. "Stay close," I muttered under my breath, following River as he led me across the yard and toward the woods. The trees, now tall and looming, seemed to close in on us as we ventured further from the safety of the house. The wind howled through the branches, making the night feel colder than it should have been. River moved with purpose, his movements swift and sure. I kept a tight grip on the leash, but he didn't slow down. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with anticipation. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking directly into a trap, but I didn't know what the trap was or who had set it. As we reached the edge of the woods, River stopped. His body went rigid, his ears perked up, and his eyes darted around. He was trying to make sense of something that I couldn't yet see. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped closer, scanning the area. And then, I heard the faint rustling of leaves, a whisper of movement just out of sight. I held my breath, straining to hear the sounds of the forest. The rustling grew louder, closer now, and suddenly, a figure emerged from behind the trees. A man, tall and cloaked in shadows, stood just a few feet away from us. His face was hidden, but I could feel his presence like a weight on my chest. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling despite myself. The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. River growled low in his throat. A warning? I could see the tension in the dog's body as he stood in front of me, acting as my protector. It was then that I realized this man wasn't just any stranger. He was part of whatever had been happening in this town. He was part of the mystery that River had led me to. The man finally spoke, his voice cold and calculated. "You should have left it alone." The words hit me like a slap, and my mind raced, trying to understand what he meant. What did he know? How much did he know about River? About the lockbox? My heart thudded in my chest as I felt the weight of the situation bear down on me. I wasn't just dealing with a lost kitten anymore. I was in over my head. "Who are you?" I repeated, my voice more forceful now. "What do you want?" The man stepped forward, his shadow falling over me. "This town. It's built on secrets. Secrets that should have stayed buried." I instinctively took a step back, but River was already ahead of me. He lunged forward, barking and growling in a way I had never seen him do before. He wasn't just protecting me, he was warning this man, warning him that he wasn't welcome. Figure didn't flinch. He stood his ground, unfazed by River's aggression. "You don't understand," he said, his tone flat. "There are things here, things you won't be able to control. It's already too late." The words didn't make sense. What was he talking about? What did he mean by too late? But before I could ask another question, he turned and disappeared back into the darkness of the woods, leaving me standing there, frozen, with nothing but the echo of his warning. River barked one last time, his body trembling, before he stopped, looking back at me with an intensity that spoke volumes. He knew something was coming. He had sensed it before I did. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. River wasn't just a kitten. He wasn't just an innocent animal I had rescued. He was tied to something much larger, something dangerous, something that had been hidden beneath the surface of this town for far too long. The man's warning echoed in my mind. As I made my way back to the house, I could feel the weight of his words settle over me. It's already too late. As I opened the door to the house, River followed me inside, his body still tense, his eyes darting around the room, as though expecting the man to appear at any moment. I closed the door behind us, locking it, but the feeling of being trapped didn't go away. The world had shifted again, and now I was part of something much bigger than I had ever imagined. I looked down at River, who was now sitting by the door, his eyes still wide, alert. Whatever challenge lay ahead, I knew we weren't ready for it, but I also knew one thing. I wasn't going to let it stop us. River had led me this far, and I wasn't about to let him down now. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever. What's coming next? This was only the beginning, and we were already too far in to turn back now. The next few days felt like an unrelenting storm, the kind where everything moves too quickly for you to keep up. River, though still my protector and constant companion, seemed different somehow. It was as if he knew things that I didn't. He would pace near the door at odd hours, his eyes scanning the street outside with an intensity that made my heart race. His once playful demeanor had faded into a quiet vigilance, one that spoke volumes about the storm on the horizon. The papers we had found in the old crate were spread out before me on the kitchen table. Every time I thought I had uncovered something important, another layer of the mystery would emerge, deeper and darker than before. The words family legacy and the pact kept appearing, references to something that had been hidden in this town for generations. It was more than just a conspiracy. It was a web of secrets, stretching far beyond what I had imagined. And then there was the lockbox. I had begun to piece together its significance, but the more I learned, the more questions arose. The name Sarah Davis, the missing teacher from years ago, was central to it all. Her disappearance was not an isolated incident. It was part of something bigger, a cover-up, a manipulation of the town's past. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. It was late one night when River's behavior shifted again. We had just finished dinner, and I was cleaning up the kitchen when I heard him growl. Not the low, almost protective growl I'd become accustomed to, but one that was deep and guttural, laced with fear. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. River was standing by the window again, his body rigid, his eyes locked on something. In the darkness outside, I moved toward him cautiously, my pulse quickening with each step. "River, what is it?" I whispered, my voice barely a breath. But he didn't respond. He just stared outside, his growl intensifying. There was something out there, something that had made him uneasy, and I couldn't ignore it. The wind had picked up, the trees outside, swaying under its force. But as I glanced out the window, I saw nothing. No movement, no shadows. Just the quiet, empty street. I looked down at River, his body still tense, his hackles raised. "Come on, buddy, let's get you away from the window," I said softly, but River resisted. He dug his paws into the floor, refusing to move. His gaze was still fixed on the street outside, and I could feel the weight of his fear pressing down on me. I knew then that something was wrong. Something had changed. It wasn't just the mystery anymore. It was the threat, the one that had been hovering just out of reach, waiting for the right moment to strike. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from outside. My heart skipped a beat, and I rushed to the window again, trying to make out any figure in the shadows. The street was still empty, but the footsteps were unmistakable, drawing closer. "Who's out there?" I muttered to myself. But before I could react, the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, unexpected sound that jolted me out of my thoughts. I looked down at River, who was now barking furiously, his body trembling with urgency. Without thinking, I grabbed the nearest weapon I could find, a kitchen knife, and moved toward the door. I couldn't be sure who was outside or what they wanted, but I wasn't going to take any chances. Not anymore. I opened the door slowly, keeping the knife hidden behind my back. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel my breath coming in short bursts. I wasn't ready for this. Whatever this was, it was happening now, and then I saw him, the man from the woods, the one who had warned me that I had gone too far. He was standing in front of me, his face obscured by the shadows. He was tall, his posture rigid, and his eyes those cold, calculating eyes were locked on mine. The moment he spoke, I could feel the air between us change. He wasn't just a stranger, he was part of something much bigger. "You're not safe here," he said, his voice low and controlled. But there was a warning in it. "None of you are." I didn't respond immediately, but my mind raced with the sudden realization that this was no coincidence. This wasn't just a man trying to intimidate me. He was part of the system that had controlled this town, this mystery, for far too long. And now, he had come to silence me. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking despite myself. I was trying to sound calm, trying to mask the fear that threatened to break through, but it wasn't easy. There was something in his presence that made the air thick with danger. I didn't know how much time we had, or if River could sense it, but I knew one thing: this man was here to stop me from uncovering the truth. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, and I instinctively backed up. "River," barked again, his body bristling with tension, but I couldn't focus on him, not now. The man was too close. "I told you," he said again, his voice colder this time, "you've already crossed the line. The more you dig, the more you put yourself and everyone around you in danger. What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice growing stronger. I had to know. I needed answers. "I want you to stop," he replied, his expression unwavering. "Leave it alone. Go back to your life, and forget everything you've learned. It's the only way to protect yourself and him." He glanced down at River, who was still barking, but this time, it wasn't out of fear. It was out of anger. Whatever the man said, River didn't trust him, and neither did I. I wasn't ready to give up. Not now. The mystery was too big, the connections too deep. I had found River, and now I had to know why. I couldn't just let it all go, I said firmly, my voice steady despite the fear that crept into my chest. "I won't stop. I have to know what happened. I have to understand what's going on here." The man's face twisted into something between a sneer and a grimace. He seemed to hesitate for a moment, then looked me in the eye and spoke the words that I would never forget. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he warned. "This isn't just about the kitten, it's about all of you. And once you've crossed that line, there's no turning back. Not for you, and not for him." Before I could react, he turned and disappeared into the night, vanishing into the darkness as quickly as he had appeared. I stood frozen for a moment, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. Riva stopped barking, but his eyes remained fixed on the spot where the man had stood. He knew something was coming. He had known it all along. I closed the door behind me, locking it again, and sank to the floor with River in my arms. My head was spinning, my thoughts racing, as I tried to process what had just happened. I didn't know who that man was, or what he had meant by his warnings. But one thing was certain: I couldn't stop now. I had to uncover the truth. For River, for Sarah, for everyone who had been caught in this web of secrets. I looked down at River, who was staring up at me, his eyes wide with something I couldn't name. He was more than just a kitten. He was a key to something much larger, and I wasn't going to let anyone stop me from finding the answers. The days that followed the man's visit felt like they belonged to someone else's life, a reality where the lines between danger and truth had blurred beyond recognition. But as I sat in my living room, River by my side, I began to realize something crucial. I had been running from the inevitable, afraid of what I might find, afraid of what River and the lockbox had led me to. But now, it was clear. I couldn't ignore this anymore. I couldn't let the past, the mysteries, the unanswered questions fester in the shadows of my life. River had been my guide through it all, whether I had realized it at first or not. His presence, his quiet vigilance, his instinct to protect, had pulled me into this. Now, I had to finish what we had started together. And it wasn't just about solving the mystery anymore. It was about understanding the history of the town, the power that had kept secrets buried for so long, and the role River played in all of it. The truth, as I had come to realize, was far more complicated than I ever could have imagined. The family legacy, the pact, wasn't just some old document or forgotten promise. It was a living, breathing entity that had shaped this town's past, a shadow that had lingered over every decision, every missing person, every whispered conversation that never made it to the public ear. Sarah Davis, the teacher who had vanished, was not just another casualty of a cold case. She had been part of something bigger, something that had tied her to the heart of this town's darkest secrets. But it wasn't just Sarah who had disappeared. So many others had fallen victim to the same web of silence and fear, and River, this little kitten, had been a part of it, all his connection to the past, to the people who had vanished, to the town that had turned a blind eye to its own history. I had to find out what had happened to Sarah, to everyone who had been lost in the process. It was early one morning when I finally made the decision. I looked down at River, his soft brown fur gleaming in the sunlight that streamed through the window. His eyes met mine, steady and calm, as if he knew what was coming, as if he had been waiting for this moment. It was no longer just about caring. For him it was about the promise I had made to find the truth. We're not stopping. River, I whispered, my voice steady now, we're going to finish this. I had spent the previous night rereading the documents. I had gathered the papers from the crate, the letters, the photographs, and it was clear now that the man's warning had been more than just a threat. It was a test, a warning to see how far I was willing to go. But I had already come too far to turn back. I needed help. I needed someone who could make sense of the mess of papers, names, and connections that had become so tangled in my mind. And that's when I thought of Randy. Randy had been by my side from the beginning. Even though he had no idea what we were getting into, he had been my sounding board, the person who had always tried to make sense of the chaos. But it was time to bring him into the heart of this. He was my friend, my ally, and he deserved to know everything. I called him that morning, asking him to meet me. He agreed without hesitation, though I could hear the concern in his voice. When he arrived at the house, I knew I had to tell him everything. The truth wasn't just mine anymore, it was ours. Together, we would figure out what had happened all those years ago. Randy walked into the living room, his eyes immediately drawn to River, who was sitting in the corner, watching him with those same steady, knowing eyes. River's been good, I said, trying to sound casual, though I could feel the weight of the moment hanging in the air. But we've got to talk. It's time for you to know what's really going on. Randy sat down, looking from River to me, a puzzled expression on his face. What's going on, exactly? He asked, his voice cautious. What's really happening with you and this cat? I took a deep breath. There was no more avoiding it. I had to say it out loud. It's not just about the kitten, Randy. It's about this town, about the history we've all ignored, the secrets we've kept buried. River, he's a part of it. I could see the confusion in his eyes, but I pressed on. I told him everything. The lockbox, the missing people, the letters, and the man who had come to warn me. I even told him about my suspicions about River's connection to Sarah and the others. The more I spoke, the more the pieces began to fit together, and the truth began to unravel in front of us. When I finished, Randy didn't say anything right away. He just sat there, taking it all in. I could see the wheels turning in his head as he processed everything I had told him. But I also knew that this wasn't easy for him. It wasn't easy for me either. So, what now? Randy asked, his voice steady, though I could tell he was still trying to process everything. What do we do with all of this? What do we do with the people in this town who have been keeping all of this hidden? I looked at River, who was still watching us, his eyes unblinking, as if he was waiting for us to make our decision. It was a strange feeling, like he had been leading us all along, guiding us without ever saying a word. We keep going, I said finally, my voice firm. We dig deeper, we find out everything we can, and then we make sure the people who are responsible for all of this, whoever they are held accountable. We bring the truth to light, no matter what it takes. Randy nodded slowly, his face hardening with determination. All right, then let's do it, together. From that moment on, we became partners in this. Not just friends, not just people caught up in a mystery. We were now part of something much larger than ourselves. The more we worked together, the more we uncovered the secrets that had been buried beneath this town for generations. We traced the connections, linked the names, followed the trail of the missing people. It was like peeling back layers of a dark, decaying history, and with every layer, we uncovered more than we had ever expected. It wasn't easy. There were moments of frustration, times when we didn't know if we were getting any closer to the truth. But River, with his quiet presence, kept us grounded. It was clear that he was more than just a kitten. He was the key to every missing pieces of the puzzle, the thread that tied all the stories together. And then one day, it all came together. We found the last piece, the document that had been missing, the final connection. It was a letter, written by Sarah Davis herself. Before she disappeared, it detailed everything, the pact that had been made, the families who had controlled the town, and the dark history they had tried to bury. In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about River, it wasn't even about me anymore. It was about the truth, and the people who had lived and died under the weight of secrets they could never escape. With River by my side, we took that final step. We brought the truth to the people who needed to hear it, and we made sure that the legacy of those who had been silenced was never forgotten. It wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do. As I sat back and looked at River, I realized how far we had come. From the scared kitten I had found under the bridge to this moment, when the truth was finally in the light, we had grown together, and in doing so, we had made the world a little bit better. I smiled as River looked up at me, his eyes steady and calm. He had led me to this moment, and I couldn't help but think that he had always known the way. The past was no longer something that haunted us. It was something we had confronted, and now, the future was ours to shape. And together, River and I would face it, no longer afraid of what lay ahead, but determined to make sure the truth never again stayed buried.